Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. Welcome to Politics and Prose. This is my first time in a really long time being here, so be nice to me. All right. My name is Jennifer McDivitt. I'm the director of branch doors for Politics and Prose, which is why I'm not usually at our Connecticut Avenue store. We now host in-person events here. Obviously, you're here, but also at our Union Market location. So take a peek at that. We've got a really great space. I'd love to see all your shiny, happy faces there. We also do virtual events and partnered events, as well as trips and classes. For a full list of confirmed events and goings-on, please go to our website, politics-prose.com. Before we get started, can you please take this time to silence your cell phone so as not to disrupt the event? Copies of the book are behind the registers today. If you'd like to purchase one copy or many, we always encourage many. I mean, the holidays are like, I don't know, right around the corner. I think this is a perfect book. So for the Q&A portion of the event, we encourage you to speak your questions clearly into the microphone at the end of the aisle here. We are both audio and video recording, live streaming today's program. Soon, you and everyone you know will be able to find the event and more on Politics and Prose YouTube channel. There will be a signing after the Q&A, so if you'd like to get your purchased book or books signed, please line up in an orderly fashion, starting at this pillar right here. Folks will come by and ask your name for personalization, so please have them ready. At the end of the event, please fold up your chairs that you're sitting in and lean them against something sturdy. Our events booksellers would greatly appreciate all and any help, so thank you for that. And now, without further ado, tonight we are very excited to welcome Rebecca Makkai, author of I Have Some Questions for You. Rebecca Makkai's last novel, The Great Believers, was a finalist for both the Pulitzer Prize and the National Book Award. It was the winner of the ALA Carnegie Medal, the Stonewall Book Award, the Clark Prize, and the LA Times Book Prize. It was one of the New York Times 10 best books in 2018. It's also one of my favorite books of 2018. She has also written the novels The Borrower and The 100-Year House, and the collection Music for Wartime, 4 stories from which appeared in the Best American Short Stories. A 2022 Guggenheim Fellow, Rebecca is on the MFA faculties of the University of Nevada, Reno at Lake Tahoe, and Northwestern University, and is artistic director of Story Studio Chicago. I Have Some Questions for You is phenomenal. I'm not going to tell you much about it, other than this is a huge bookseller favorite. So thank you for that, Rebecca. To quote another favorite author, Jennifer Egan, part boarding school drama, part forensic whodunit, I Have Some Questions for You is a true literary mystery, haunting and hard to put down. I'd only make one amendment to that statement and say that it was impossible to put down. But I'll let these two amazing authors talk about that. Makkai will be joined in conversation with Angie Kim. Angie Kim is a former editor of the Harvard Law Review. I'm sure you have all seen her here at many of our events. She is the author of the international bestseller and Edgar Award-winning book, Miracle Creek. She has written for the New York Times Book Review, the Washington Post, Vogue, and Glamour, among many others. Her second novel, Happiness Falls, is forthcoming from Hogarth Random House in September of 2023. Please join me in warmly welcoming Rebecca Makkai and Angie Kim.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I'm having deja vu because I was just here. But
she was literally here last night.
I was literally here last night.
Champion of the literary world.
So fun. I'm so excited to be here, though, guys. And thank you so much for that warm introduction. Thank you so much for coming to D.C.
Oh, my God, of course.
We're so excited.
Yeah,
Yay.
It snowed in Chicago yesterday, so I felt really, really glad to get on the plane this morning.
Right? Okay, Rebecca Makkai, I have some questions for you. Ha, ha, ha. Okay. Seriously, I had to do that. I'm being goofy.
I know. Well, and when
we had very strong cocktails next door,
Just one each.
Well, no, I mean 2 cocktails between the two of us.
Between the two of us, okay.
Yeah. So, so sorry about that. But how many people have started their conversations with you with, I have some questions for you?
You know, I would say either, maybe like 50%, 25% of those being like, I'm so sorry, but I have to do this.
That's me. Yeah, I'm so sorry, but I had to do it.
No. Okay. When I named the book, because we came to the title late, and I was like, all right, the tax that I have to pay is...
We're definitely talking about the title and the cover.
Yeah.
We're definitely doing that.
Okay, cool.
All right. So first, I have to fangirl a little bit more about this amazing book. I'm a huge fan, of course. She already knows because we've done panels together. But Music for Wartime, I have to say, for those of you who haven't read it, it's one of my favorite story collections, and it's something that I keep by my side in my writing nook. It's actually a little closet that I write in. And I have it next to me, and I read The Briefcase, which is one of her amazing, amazing short stories. And I read that like every once in a while, and I encourage everyone who aspires to be a writer in this room to do the same. So this particular book has gotten raves in everything from New York Times and New Yorker to The Atlantic and NPR and everything else. Starred reviews everywhere, and pre-pub reviews predicted that it would be huge, as it has been. It's an instant New York Times bestseller. So before we talk about the book itself, I just wanted to ask you, this is your first book since being a finalist for the Pulitzer and for, the National Book Award. How does it feel? Is it different? Like, what has it been like?
That's a good question. I think, so part of the thing for me has been that, like, COVID put this stop on my travel. And I was really lucky because I got to tour for both hardcover and paperback, and then there was COVID. But then I was so out of my public self, I was so out of that world for a few years that then when they started talking, like my publicist started talking about the plans for this book and started talking about excitement, and I was like, who are you talking about? Because she sounds fancy, but I don't know that lady. So that was kind of a trip. And then actually, interestingly, getting on the road for this and meeting a lot of the Great Believers readers for the first time, because there are a lot of people coming up like in the signing lines. Right. They're like, yeah, you wrote a new book anyway, and talk to you about the Great Believer, which I love. I'm very happy about. That's been great.
So has it been different though? Like even aside from touring and all that, like just the support that you've felt from your publisher and things like that?
Yeah. Well, there's definitely you build it, right? Like this is my 5th book, and you build audience, you build that trust, you build that support, etc. There is always this little bit of it's not so much from my publisher because they've been very supportive all along, but festivals that I used to go to by paying my own way there and then couch surfing, and now they're paying me, and I'm like, you paid people to go to this festival all along?
Yes, exactly.
What the hell?
Right.
Where was this money when I was broke as hell? I'm very appreciative, but what?
Totally.
So there's that.
Totally get
there's
it.
that.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it does feel. It's just it feels different. It's just been slow.
Yeah.
And so you don't I was saying to you before, and I think you'll feel when you go on tour for your second book this fall. Yeah. You don't when it hits you is when it's like the next book comes out and you hear your own bio read, and you're like, oh, whoa, I did all that stuff.
Yeah. Exactly.
But it doesn't, in the moment, you're just day to day. It doesn't feel
it's very, very cool.
It's very cool. I'm incredibly grateful. Yeah.
And I'm incredibly honored to be here with you. Aww. So let's talk about the book itself now. So I have heard you in various, interviews, and also when we've talked, as talking about, I have some questions for you, as a literary feminist boarding school murder mystery, which I love that. It's like such an amazing genre. It's a very specific genre, right?
There's only one.
Yeah. No.
Well, there are there are definitely boarding school books, and there are definitely ones that are do this dark academia murder thing, right?
I mean, there's the Secret History, which your book has been compared to.
Which is a college novel, though.
Yeah, that's true. you're
You
right.
know?
You're
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
And you know that I love boarding school novels because
Yeah.
we were talking. I went to a school called Interlochen, and you
Yeah.
have your own thing with boarding
Yeah.
schools. So just tell us about both the origin and also like how would you describe it?
Yeah.
Actually, you know what? I would just want to know how many people in the audience have actually read this book already?
We could say we're
Is that like
started. That's a lot of
everybody?
people. Holy
okay,
crap, thank you.
You know what? Let's do a different thing. Who has not read it? Are there all right. Okay.
That's
I was
fine.
gonna say, no. I was gonna say maybe we can actually have a spoiler including discussion.
No,
okay,
but
we will not. Okay, fine. Fine.
I'm good at speaking cryptically.
Okay.
So that people who've read it
Yes.
know what I'm talking
Okay,
about.
good.
And people who haven't read
Good,
it have
good,
no
good.
idea what I'm saying.
All
So
right.
that works.
Okay, but for the people who haven't read it, can you tell us a little bit
Yeah,
about
yeah.
it and also the origin story for everybody?
Yeah, I'll do the kind of what it is first, which is, so we have a woman in her 40s. Her name is Bodie Kane. She's invited back in 2018 in the dead of winter for 2 weeks to teach at the boarding school in New Hampshire that she attended as a sort of adrift scholarship kind of kid. And while she's there, her mind is, of course, back on the 1990s when she graduated, very specifically on the death of a young woman their senior year, this young woman named Thalia Keith. She was found dead in the campus swimming pool, but with significant injuries to her body. And very quickly...
she was also her roommate.
She was, briefly her roommate, although they weren't friends. And very quickly, a young black man named Omar Evans, who works as an athletic trainer at the school, is convicted of her murder with what seems at the time like a lot of evidence against him, including a confession. There are a lot of people out there and online who believe that the wrong person is in prison. And one of Bodie's students, in the short time she's back on campus, is among them and wants to do a class project about this case. And although Bodie did feel like the case was solved at the time, she very quickly starts to realize all the things that were not answered, and we kind of go from there. So that's basically the book. Yeah.
And the origin story.
Origin story, and it's I always
love
wish
this
is when I wish there were like one bolt of lightning because it makes a better story. Like I was walking down the street and I tripped and I found this plot, but several things. So I do. I live. This gets complicated. I live on the campus of the boarding school where my husband teaches. But more specifically, so I was a day student at a boarding school. I went away to college, graduate school, met my husband on the East Coast. We lived in Baltimore, and I had a job offer back in Chicago. So I dragged him back. He was a high school English teacher.
I did not know about the Baltimore
Oh,
part.
yeah,
Do you
we got
think
married.
do you think that had anything to do with? Well, okay. Well,
We'll talk-
I'm
yeah.
getting ahead of myself.
Okay. Yeah, no, we got married in Baltimore. I love Baltimore. Dragged him back to Chicago, and he was a high school English teacher. The place he got the job was my old high school. So, and we were going to stay for 3 years. It's been 21. So I live at my high school, which is a little bit weird. And my daughter's a freshman now there, which is interesting. Yeah. But it's not completely unheard of, especially in the boarding school world. There are a lot of, say, alumni who teach at their school. I don't teach there. I just live there. I have no responsibilities, which is great. So there was always, I was interested all along in the things that media, whether it's books or movies, get wrong about boarding schools, like this kind of mystical vibe, and like it's always October for some reason, and everything's like really gothic, and it's like this is not actually representative of these places. Or their diversity, honestly. Like there's a lot that people miss. So there's a little bit of like, I want to write like a kind of realist novel about a place like this. I also find it fascinating from the faculty side of things, just this like really interesting little almost gated community, this enclave, like we've all raised our kids together. In a very interesting way. So I was, people were asking me for years when I was going to write a boarding school novel, and for a very long time the answer was like on my deathbed, so that nobody thinks it's about them. But then it snowballed together with a bunch of other things. There was this ongoing interest that I have in the ways we think about true crime, and of course this is fictional crime, but within the world of the book, it's very much about the sort of true crime industrial complex.
So do you
we have
think
going.
that, and this is where the Baltimore connection comes in. Do you think the Serial podcast like did play a part in that? Because obviously that's something that I was very interested in. I'm from Baltimore also. And you know, Korean immigrant victim, all that kind of stuff.
Right. So yes and no. Yes, in that it was the first podcast that like any of us listened to, right? That was me going on my phone being like, what is the podcast app that I need to, like,
podcast?
What do I
general?
push? Right?
Yeah.
Like shaking my phone if I but so there was that, and the podcast itself I have a few issues with, but the case, the undecided case, I became very invested in. I was interested in that particular instance in the way that people were, these adults were being asked constantly to try to remember this one day of high school and the problems inherent in that. And the one piece that really led directly into the book, within that bunch of people, they all basically still lived in Baltimore. So they reconvene at this courthouse and it's like they just drive there. Versus if something like this happened, say at a boarding school in the woods in New Hampshire, nobody lives there, nobody ever lived there, these kids never lived there. You'd have to all come back and stay in a hotel. And that was originally going to be the book, was the first thing I wrote. So that just very vaguely, late in the book, there is a legal proceeding. And we skip a little bit ahead. And the first thing I wrote was Bodie arriving in town for that, getting into this hotel. And the whole idea was like all these people stuck in a hotel together and it's the world's weirdest reunion. And there was just
I kind of love that. I love that part of the book also, but I love that premise.
I loved it too. The problem was there was so much backstory that I had to get in then, not only about what happened in the 90s, but what happened in recent years leading up to this. And it was just, you know, it was like that dreaded like chapter 2 information dump. It was like, she arrives at the hotel. Anyway, here's everything that ever happened. And I just couldn't. So I was like, I'll just like write a little prologue of what happened before this. And then that got longer and longer and longer, and it turned into 3/4 of the book. So
I'm so glad, because I mean, that part was really, really cool when they all come together. Because that has its own particular energy, I think. And also just the idea, the nostalgia of, you know, running the high school, you know, reunion, all of that sort of stuff, and all of the tropes that go along with that. That's so cool. But I am so glad that you did it in this way, because it allowed the momentum of the present day story to sort of go on for a really long time. You know, it's not like a couple of days, right?
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it's funny. Well, first of all, the other thing that happened with all that is like, I was like, well, I was writing this in 2019 and it was kind of vaguely set like now. And then 2020 came along and I was like, oh, well, I have to make a really clear decision about when this is. Right. And so I was like, well, I'll just move this back. So because I was like, if I put it in 2020, everyone will be like, oh, and COVID's about, not that they would, but it would feel like it was on the horizon. So I'll put it in 2018. And then this was a reason that I was like, okay, so then I'll skip a few years. Because also, like, the law moves very, very slowly, unlike in the movies. And I wanted to be very realistic. So I was like, I'll set it in 2022 when COVID will surely be ancient history. And that didn't really pan out. But I managed to.
You definitely managed. It was good. But, you know, what you're saying about sort of the almost claustrophobic feel of being on campus, I think that's really interesting, because I was going to read this. Ron Charles in the Washington Post, one of the many, many rave reviews. And we love Ron Charles around
He's
here,
the
right?
best.
We all do, right? He said, prep school novels are usually cloistered in sweaty isolation, but this is a story that constantly casts our attention to the outer world. And, you know, he was talking about the voice being very intimate, but there are these references to the Me Too stories in the outer world. And I wanted to actually, and I think it's just so haunting, it was actually one of these refrains and like a kind of a writing device, but I don't want to say it in that way because it's not like a device in a devicey way. But to me, it was really haunting, and I wanted to ask you to read from that that's okay.
I can totally do that.
This is the first part. I mean, you have so many of these, but this is, I think, the first time that you have one of these references.
Yeah, yeah. So, so basically what's going on here is when Bodie goes back to this campus, she's put up in sort of a guest house along with this guy who's there to teach another class. His name is Oliver. And what we know, two things you need to know going in here. One is that Bodie's husband has been texting her saying, like, stay off Twitter, stay off, and she assumes it's because there's some news story that's going to upset her. There's, like, been a story in the news. And then also the other thing you need to know is that the whole time she's been there, people keep asking who's watching her children while she's away from home. Okay. After Fran left, I asked Oliver, do you check the news? Was there anything big today? I was itching to check Twitter, but if Oliver could just tell me what had happened, it would be better. It was important that I got sleep. Instead, though, he scooped up the remote and turned on the big TV in the seating area. And there it was, the reason Jerome had warned me off the internet. Anderson Cooper with new developments on a story I'd found particularly disturbing. It doesn't matter which story. Let's say it was the one where the young actresses said yes to a pool party and didn't know. Or no, let's say it was the one where the rugby team covered up the girl's death and the school covered for the rugby team. Actually, it was the one where the therapist spent years grooming her. It was the one where the senator, then a promising teenager, shoved his dick in the girl's face. She was also a promising teenager. It was the one where the billionaire pushed the woman into the phone booth, but no one believed her. The one where the high school senior was acquitted of rape because the sophomore girl had shaved her pubic region, which somehow equaled consent. Oliver asked if I was hungry, and I shrugged. It was the one where the woman who stabbed her rapist with scissors was the one who ended up in jail. It was the one where the star had a secret button to lock the doors. Oliver called Foxy's and ordered us a white pizza with sage and a mushroom and onion pizza and extra packets of red pepper flakes. I decided I was allowed to eat one slice of each. It was the one where the harasser ended up on the Supreme Court. It was the one where the rapist ended up on the Supreme Court. It was the one where the woman, shaking, testified all day on live TV and nothing happened. Anderson had moved on to other topics, but Oliver asked if I minded his switching over to MSNBC. I didn't. I said, I can't believe there's finally cable on campus. We used to get 3 channels. Just to watch Beverly Hills 90210, we had to have Danny McCulloch's mom tape it every Wednesday in Darien and mail it to us on VHS. The story was on MSNBC too. The one where the judge said the swimmer was so promising. The one where the rapist reminded the judge of himself as a young rapist. It was the one where her body was never found. It was the one where her body was found in the snow. It was the one where he left her body for dead under the tarp. It was the one where she walked around in her skin and her bones for the rest of her life, but her body was never recovered. You know the one. The pizza was at the door. Oliver found us plates. He said, so who's watching your kids while you're here?
I have chills from that. It's so good. And it's a refrain that goes throughout the novel. And I think it adds to the intimacy of the voice, which is funny because it's telling us about something that is so general. But in naming all these specific cases that are so dissimilar and yet the same at their core, I think it makes us feel closer to her. It's this very intense intimacy that I feel like.
I like that.
I really, really love that. And I feel like the other thing that you do with a voice that builds on that intense intimacy is the use of the you. So for those who haven't read it, there is, it's in first person. And, but she's talking to us and all of a sudden she sometimes switches into a you. And we don't know who it is. And gradually throughout the novel, we figure out who the you is. Right. And it's kind of like when you figure it out and then, you keep on figuring out more and more. And I just won't say any more than that because I don't want to spoil it. But it's kind of chilling. So can you talk a little bit about that and when you discovered this, both of these kind of devices, if you will.
Yeah, it's funny. So I have a clearer memory of exactly how I got into this kind of litany thing than how I got into the second person. The second person, the idea there is, like there are times in your life, maybe when you return to a place, or maybe it's someone you've just lost, but there are times when you just kind of almost thinking all your thoughts at someone, or you feel like that person is watching you, like that person is the one who sees what you're doing. And the vibe there is she steps back on this campus and there is someone who she just kind of is sort of thinking the whole book at, right? Like the person that she kind of feels like can see her almost in a very non-literal way. So that vibe made sense to me, right? You step back someplace you haven't been in a long time and there are just certain people on your mind. I know that, that one, it's more, you just throw a lot of spaghetti at the wall when you first start writing something, and a lot of it you take away. The spaghetti metaphor breaks down there very quickly. I'm not sure how you take spaghetti. I don't know what that. Okay, but
it's very dirty,
a lot of it doesn't. You don't keep.
It's
it
very
doesn't
messy.
stick. A lot of it you don't eat. But
You don't eat any of it.
No, yeah, no. The wall. You shouldn't eat the wall spaghetti.
No,
That's
no,
really
definitely
unhygienic.
not.
Don't do that. But I think it was just something that like I kind of tried, like, hey, like writing along and going, and and what would that be? And then, and I liked it. I kept it because it allowed kind of a pinpoint for all these observations. It allowed ultimately kind of a place to direct a lot of her anger.
Yeah. And it also made it universal. It would be universal anyway. Her experience with some of the Me Too and some of the grooming stuff that she witnessed and that she experienced, but by virtue of her sort of, having these lists, it really did make it very universal in a literal way. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I love that device.
Thank you. Well, that one I can tell you more clearly what happened, which was that I was trying to find ways, like I have this person, it was important to me that I had someone who was very put together as an adult, but had been really a mess as a kid. So that when she steps back into this kind of middle ground, this campus, she's really pulled between those two people. And then early drafts, she kind of had her act too much together. I needed to find different ways to like crumble her adult life out from under her. So things go wrong with her job, things go wrong with her ex-husband, things go wrong with all these different things, so that she's dragged more and more back into that kid that she was, just emotionally and mentally. And one of the things I wanted to use was, and this was actually the earliest draft, but I wanted there to be a story in the news that was really upsetting her and just kind of throwing her off the way that can happen, right?
Absolutely, of course.
Yeah, and then, so the thing is, I didn't want to take a real thing, like, say, Christine Blasey Ford testimony, and then, like, try to give that its due in the book somehow.
Yeah.
And I also didn't want to invent a case and then have the details of that case be pulling away from the details you need to keep track of for the main thing.
Right.
So it was honestly just this moment of like impasse, this moment of frustration. And then I was like, well, what if it's all of them?
Yeah.
Like, what if it's just literally all of them all at
Right.
once and she won't tell us which one?
I love that because you can see her in her room. You can see her like, I can imagine her in my mind just sort of like clicking through all of the different news channels, and on each one there's a different, story, and that's kind of the experience that we have as readers going through these lists. It's really, and is that where you got the title? Okay, so I will now ask you about the title and the cover. I have some questions for you. I mean, so obviously that is, that is the format of this podcast and all of that sort of stuff. But that when I first realized reading this book for the first time, the you and who that was, it did make me think, oh my God, that is the title. Well, how did I not get this until now,
Well, because and early on, right, like you pick it up and it's like you, like the universal you. And then even the first word of the book is you also. It's like the first line is you've heard of her. And that is still a universal you. That's not talking to this one person.
Yeah.
So then it kind of that meaning of that you changes.
Right.
Basically, there was all along.
Was that always the title?
No. The title. It had a lot of. The original title was 95, which was the year that they're looking back on. But it doesn't really mean anything unless you know what the book is about. So it doesn't really.
No.
It doesn't work.
I'm so glad that you changed
No,
the
like
title.
95 what? Like, yeah.
Right.
That was much of my working title. And we went through a bunch of others.
Yeah.
They were none of them were good. There was a chapter. There is a chapter still late in the book where the first line is, "I have some questions for you," and then the chapter is a list of questions.
Oh.
Did you miss that when you came to it?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
because you're just
did.
like, yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Well, because the first time I actually listened to it, I was doing it on audio.
Oh, yeah. No, things can go
'cause
by.
I
Yeah.
think your publisher sent me the
Yeah,
audiobook
yeah.
or whatever. Yeah.
That was in there, and then as we were kind of desperately, we meaning like me and my editor and my agent, like desperately searching for a title, and you do this thing of just kind of panic flipping through the book and like scrolling. Like,
yes, I'm very familiar
I hope
with
someone
that.
said. I hope I made someone say
Yes.
something smart that I could use as
Right.
a title. And I think I changed. I think it was originally like "I have questions" or something. It was, but I was like, I'm going to change that line into something that would also work as the title. And then we'll do double duty.
Very cool. And what about the cover?
Okay, yeah. So the idea, once you've read the book, might be blood in the water. But that's not very literal.
And also, that's not a spoiler. So
no, it's not a
for those
spoiler.
of
No,
you,
that's so we wanted water. That was a thing all along. We did not want literal like pool lanes, anything like that. The designer who did this, she actually, I could tell, this is very sweet. I could tell she was younger because she was like, she originally did this, but this was all kind of hot pink. And she was like, because like hot pink, I was thinking like the 90s, hot pink. And I was like, no, that was
wait, were there
a totally different decade.
Was there a hot pink in
No,
the 90s? Okay, I was like,
no.
what?
No, that was.
I don't remember hot pink in the 90s.
No.
Okay.
There was like Gwyneth had like a Pepto pink Oscar dress moment.
Oh, that was like.
But that was like
that was
late.
later.
That was later.
That
90s,
was way
yeah.
later.
No, there was no hot pink in the 90s, and especially not like these kids. Like I'm reading about kids like she was like into Nirvana, and so like this is not. But I loved a lot of the. So we were like, I was like, could it be more like bloody? Could it be and less
and the water of the pool,
right? Exactly. That's
okay.
kind of it.
Yeah,
It's,
cool.
it's not
I love
literal, but
yeah,
it definitely. I mean, you want the cover to sort of telegraph vibe, if nothing else. And yeah, like you're not gonna think this is like a sunny, happy comedy. Yeah,
no, definitely.
It's like it's a dark book.
Okay, so let's also talk about structure.
Yeah.
So we've done panels on structure together at the
Yes, we
AWP
have.
and things like that. I'm a sucker for structure, and I loved Katie Waldman's review in the New Yorker, which was
I did too.
again another. It was such an amazing
It was so good.
review.
Yeah.
Okay, but one of the things that she talks about is both you and Bodie being students of structure. And something that I love that you do in this, it reminded me a little bit of, and this is one of my favorite books of all time, Tim O'Brien's In the Lake of the Woods. Have you ever heard it? I read it.
I have not read it actually. No.
It's really, it's a mystery. It's a missing person mystery. And what he does is he has hypotheses. There are like 7 different hypotheses.
Oh man! So I'm glad I didn't read them because now I can say
exactly,
I didn't rip them off,
exactly.
So, okay.
No, you totally didn't remember. So you can. We actually have it on video. Like
If he ever sues me, he
no,
can't
no,
sue
no, yeah, no. But I love that you have these hypotheses chapters. So there are these hypotheses chapters that sort of talk about the different things, and one of them being like, maybe it's me. Maybe it's me that did it, and you guys are reading this very incredibly twisty book or whatever. And I thought that was really, really cool that you did that because it was really incredibly detailed and very thoughtful and convincing. Like in every single hypothesis, I was like, yeah, this is it. This is the answer. And then when you come to the end, and then it's kind of like a twisty ending. And Maureen Corrigan said on Fresh Air that your ending is postmodern and a twist worthy of Poe, which I thought was really, really cool. Well, I mean, I thought so. Anyway, so tell us a little bit about like those. Did you always have those in mind? Were those like exercises? I could see you as the writer being like, what are the different answers? Like, did you always know what the answer was going to be?
Okay, so a couple of things. One is I did always know what happened.
Did?
Yeah.
Oh my
You know,
God, I'm so
I have
impressed.
a few friends who are like mystery writers, like series of mysteries, right? And what almost all of them has said is that they've learned as they've written that it really helps to know exactly what happened, like what went down. So I did. I knew what happened, and I knew the clue that would get her to that. But I didn't, a lot of other things around it changed for sure. So the hypotheses, this was like a very clunky, this is why we have many drafts. Originally, I had like part 1, all this 2018 stuff. Then we're like more than halfway through the book, and suddenly we got all of the hypotheses back to back.
Oh, really?
And it was kind of, my idea was sort of like, it was almost like just like, you read the first one and you're like, oh my God, this is what happened. But then you see that there's another one and you're like, no, wait, okay, maybe it was this. I think I watched Clue too many times growing up, actually, the VHS version where they like stacked all the endings up.
Yeah.
Sort of that, but then you went on to like the, 2022 part. So that didn't work because it was like hanging a big lead weight in the middle of a clothesline, like a slack clothesline. It was a disaster. And my editor wanted me to cut those. And I was like, no, like that, you don't like just say no to your editor, but it's like more often like you going like, I see what you mean, but like, here's what I was actually trying to do. Can I try it this way?
Right.
So, discovered that if I spread them out, and then the next step in that was like having them really be things that Bodie was thinking through in real time.
Yeah, of course.
Not like some authorial voice coming in with it.
Yeah. Which makes
then
sense because she would be.
Yeah.
She would be going like, unless she actually is the killer. But I mean, even if she was the killer, she would be thinking like, here's the evidence. Like any reasonable person who's coming in from the outside might think this.
Yeah.
And then like a couple more chapters of other evidence. And then like somebody else might be thinking that.
Yeah.
Well,
and it's also
and it made sense in that way. It was
hope so.
organic.
Good. I made the decision early on to trap us in the present. Right? Like you could have a book and like The Great Believers jumps back and forth between 2 time periods, right? You could do that. But my choice was like, no, like this is about being an adult and trying to look back and not quite being able to. Right. Real life, you're stuck in the present and everything you know about yourself is memory. So like, let's do that. But then within that, I, as the author, needed ways to get back and actually show possibilities, so that even though, of course, the thing she guesses, none of those is exactly what happened, when we do learn what happened, we kind of have the framework for what we like,
You totally
what this
do.
might have looked
and
like.
also there are things that we had seen all along that she had actually clued us into, and then we feel like idiots, which is a great pleasure. I think it's a great pleasure when, as a reader, I come to the ending and I'm
Right,
like,
I know what you mean, yeah.
this is inevitable. Like it's one of those surprising but inevitable,
Right.
and you're like, I should have seen this all along. Why did I not? It's so satisfying, and I think you hid enough things in those little vignettes, in the hypotheticals, that we got to that place.
I hope so. Yeah. So that it's like the idea being you can never go back and actually see this. You're never going to know everything about it.
Right.
But, first of all, her just constant attempt to, and then secondly, am I giving you enough that then by the end you can go, okay, so it happened over here instead of over there, but I basically think I know how this happened.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, I have a question for the audience. Who in this audience actually follows Rebecca's Substack? Anyone? Okay,
Yeah, nice,
so
thank you.
So so I did too. And have you been following and loving, as I have, her stuff on the endings of stories? Right, like. I have been loving it.
Cool.
And it's been so cool. So I wanted to ask you to analyze your own ending.
Oh, yeah, I can do
and
that.
obviously
I'll be
you
cryptic,
have to
don't
be,
worry.
yeah, you have to be cryptic.
Well, it's also, I'm talking about like the last paragraph, which even if I read out loud right now, it would not give
you would
anything
not.
away,
Yeah,
right?
you're right.
So
Yeah, but even more than the last paragraph, like, right, it's like that you actually do give us an answer, you know, which is
right.
It's, yeah.
Well, yeah. So first of all, there's the question of how much closure, right? You're going to give on anything. There are definitely ways in which there is closure. Like, and this is not a huge spoiler, but like, this is not the book where the ending is like, and we'll never know, and that's the point, like, right? Because that would be so obnoxious.
Well, okay, so my book coming up is kind of like
okay,
that, but whatever. It's okay. It's fine.
But
It's
no, but I
fine,
mean,
fine.
no. But I mean, like with a book where the point is like a murder mystery that you know what I mean,
Okay,
right?
no,
like
it's okay.
that's
I'm not
different.
giving
Yeah.
you a hard time.
Okay.
It's fine. It's okay. I love you. It's fine.
No, but I mean, there are many books. What I'm saying, like, there are many books that end without resolution, and it works really, really well.
So the one that I told you about, the Tim O'Brien
Yeah.
one with the hypotheses, it in the Lake of the Woods, I recommended it to my book club, and I am no longer allowed to pick any books because they all like threw it at the wall because
Oh
they were
my
like,
God.
we have no idea.
Yeah.
And that is the point. There's like a
Yeah.
footnote in that novel
Yeah.
about how that is not the point, or that is the point.
Yeah.
And yeah. So
Well, this is the thing.
So
It's
there
like
we
the
go.
more that you set, basically what I'm saying is like the more you set something up to be an actual mystery, like we are here to solve this, then if in the end you don't do that, that is really like you better have real purpose to that. Like you better, right? Like Tim O'Brien, I'm assuming, right?
yeah.
Like be like,
Yeah.
yes, like this is intentional. It's not just like, kind of wishy-washy, right?
Yeah.
So in this particular book, I think it would have been deeply, deeply unsatisfying not to know, right? So that part of things, there's closure, that's wrapped up. But there are other things, in terms of the outcomes for individual people that are
Absolutely.
very much not. And I'm going to be cryptic here, but partly just to be true to the way that the American justice and carceral system work. Yeah. I'm not going to slap a happy
No,
fate
absolutely
on,
not.
right?
No. Yeah.
So there's that.
Yeah.
There's that question.
Yeah,
of
because
resolution,
you're
right?
actually trying to be realistic and you're actually trying to say something about the justice system.
Yeah.
Also. Yeah.
Yeah, no, exactly. And it does not do anyone...
And about racism.
Yes,
and,
yeah. It does not do anyone any favors to do the Law and Order ending
Yeah.
of like every case is solved, including the person basically confessing.
Right.
And then we send them off to prison. And prison is the place where people go so you never have to think of them ever again.
Yeah.
And that is... the repetition of that narrative
Yeah.
in our media is not
Yeah.
helpful.
And all the wrongs that have been done throughout this entire process are somehow corrected by the end. And
Right, they don't
you
make
know.
mistakes on Law and Order,
Yeah,
right? Like that kind of,
exactly.
like they don't,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
So there's that. Then in terms of the actual ending, it ends on some plants, which I promise it's not as sad as I made it sound. But she basically, I was teaching at the Tin House Writers Workshop in Oregon, and the poet Kaveh Akbar was also there, and he was giving this craft talk, and he was talking when fiction writers give craft talks, it's like this very like how to like boop, boop, boop. And then when poets give craft talks, it's like, let's talk about wonder.
Or it's like, let me read you a poem that I wrote that reminds me of the answer that it might be.
Yeah. No, I mean, this guy, I could listen to him talk all day. And he said this, he was talking about photosynthesis in this way that made me I was like, whoa. And I started writing this stuff down. And I was like, this is how I'm going to end my novel on photosynthesis. I promise it makes sense in context. But you have that, right? Like especially for a novel, well, for any kind of fiction, you're probably not going to end on a plot moment, right? You're probably going to end on... It's almost like
an image or
right?
something.
Yeah, I think of the equivalent of like some of our really, really great TV that we have now, just the way that music takes us out. Like the way, I think Mad Men did that better than anyone, like ending an episode on exactly the right music. There's something...
That was so great.
Right?
The Coke, right?
Oh, God, yeah, that one. But the one that ended on You Are 16 going, and it was like the eeriest thing.
Yeah.
So I do think there's this like, ending on image hopefully in a meaningful way. It has that same thing. It's sort of the
Definitely.
more of a parallel than an actual plot point.
Okay, so we have 15 more minutes for questions. Do people have questions? If you have questions, please line up. Please come up and line up at this mic. Yeah. And because it is being streamed live and also being recorded for the future, please speak into the mic. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, go for it.
What inspired you to become a writer?
That's a really good question. What inspired me to become a writer? I like that. So I think I knew I wanted to be a writer by about 7th grade. Right at this time that my writing got really, really bad, like in like self-indulgence, like the same age when you discover black and white photography, and then you take photos of like a cigarette in the streets, and you're like, woo.
I love that.
Right. But I was pretty hell bent on it. I'll say, I was a big reader as a kid. My parents were both linguistics professors, so I grew up in a fairly interesting household in terms of that. But that was not necessarily about writing entirely. But they were, my dad was also a poet. It was not the kind of, in that household, and I think somewhat unique for an immigrant household, for a first generation, me saying I wanted to be a writer, they did not look at me like I was nuts. So that was incredibly helpful. Great writing instruction, just lucked into great writing instruction from like middle school summer program through college. And, partly you want to keep doing something that you get good attention for, that you get like, good feedback on. But also I just, overactive imagination from a very, very young age. My only sibling was 10 years older, so I was like playing in my room with those like remember little people that they're like these wooden peg people, and then later they were plastic. They were like cylinders. They were cylinder people with faces. It was a very sad toy to like. I don't know. They had a bust. You guys know what I'm talking about? They had a little bust. Yeah. I would just like make up stories in my room, and then there's. I think something that happens, they say this a lot with like visual art, that every kid draws, but then a lot of us stop. And similarly, every kid is making up stories, whether or not they're writing them down, they're playing, right? And then a lot of people stop. And I just never had any interest in stopping. And so that fortunately has turned into an actual career.
I love that.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hello. So first of all, I just wanted to say how grateful I am for the Story Studio community that I found in the pandemic. And I came to the conference 2 years ago with T. Kira Madden, so that was just so special.
Oh, I love her.
And I still go to the virtual write-in, so thank you so much.
Makes me happy.
But I just wanted to ask you any advice you have for openings, especially in The Great Believers. That's one of my favorite openings of a novel, with the program folded up and like those little, just.
Thank you.
I mean, I was just so gutted when I read that. So just any advice, because it sounds like your ending when you start, but in terms of finding that entry point, I mean, as a writer, that's something I really struggle with. Beginnings.
Well, it's tricky because there's the entry point in terms of how are you going to approach this thing. What are you going to write first? And then there's the entry point in terms of what do readers need to read first. And the first thing that you write does not necessarily end up being the first thing that readers read. So as in this case, I wrote the beginning of the last section first. With The Great Believers, I think I started with that scene. It wasn't those words originally. So there's a lot of trial and error, and you don't know the story yet when you start. So how would you know what the right beginning is? You just got to start knowing that what you're committing to paper in those first months or whatever of writing, you're not committing to that being the opening of your story or your book. You're just committing to that being your personal runway. And then later, you're going to go in and see like, okay, what is the actual intro that a reader needs into this world? Some common writing advice, and I think it can be oversimplified, but some useful writing advice, I think, is the idea to start your story as late as you can. Of course, I did that. Took that too literally when I first tried this, and I was like, no, I need to back up 4 years. But if you think about just like say Hamlet, right? That he's not starting it like with the death of the father and the mother, like all this other stuff that led up to it. he's also not starting it like way too late where it's like they're about to stab each other to death, right? But it's like, this moment when the ghost shows up, that is about as late as you could really start that story. Everything's going, and then we're going to get in. So I think one thing to look for, I think, as you read is to like how, once you've read the whole thing, looking back at a beginning and go, okay, like, why in the timeline did we start where we did? What would it have looked like if they started way, way back in the story or started way later in the story? And then beyond that, it's just, like figuring out what ends up being a useful image to open on, what ends up being not a desperate opening, but an interesting opening, I have a friend who teaches writing who calls when that opening is like so desperate, he calls those "that was the night my dead sister had sex with the aliens" openings. Like, please read.
Please get hooked into the story.
I'll
like
pay
at
you
the
money.
first page.
I'll pay you. So yeah, but if that helps at all.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you very much. This is such a great read. I finished it at about 5:30 this morning.
Woo!
I got it on Sunday, so
Oh my God.
yeah, just a real page turner for me, and I've enjoyed listening to you. I wanted to ask you about one theme that came out strongly to me, which is complicity. So
Yeah.
good people being complicit and having their own version of why they don't need to be involved in the story.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, that really was thematic for me. It's not something that I set out going, I'm going to write a book about complicity, but you start to recognize your own themes partway through, or maybe in revision. And this ended up being, the part of what Bodie is going through is her slow realizations of the systems that she is part of. She was a part of this school, even though she felt like an outsider. She is a part of the patriarchy, even as she's also one of its victims. She is a part of the institution of whiteness. She's a part of the carceral system. We all are a part of the carceral system, whether you know someone in prison or not. And what that means, just, the fact that you feel like an outsider does not mean you are not part of those systems. And then what does that mean in terms of your responsibility, your complicity, your guilt, and I'm not providing easy answers on those at all, because I don't have answers on those things. But that is the thematic water that I wanted us to be swimming in. So I appreciate you noticing that. Thank you.
It's not a simple murder mystery. There's many layers.
Right. Yeah. Thank you.
Hi there.
Hi.
What's a question or topic that you wish you were asked at these sorts of events that
Ooh,
people don't pick at enough?
yeah. So I think some of the most fun for me is when someone asks really specific question, because odds are, the more specific it is, the odds are that I haven't spoken about it as much. And there are things like writing about athletics at this school, for instance, that were like, it's like that took a lot of like weird research and a lot of like thinking and nobody ever asked me about that, or just like in some certain individual characters. I think sometimes where you can just you just pick out a random minor character and be like, tell me about this person. That can be really fun too. So, thank you.
Thank you so much. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the choice of setting for the book. And
Yeah.
maybe to me, it almost seemed like the woods is a character. In a
Sure,
way, and
sure.
The change of the seasons, kind of echoing what's happened with the story. Just anything you could say about that.
Yeah, I definitely could. So first of all, just broadly, the setting, New Hampshire is very specific. One thing, I wanted to set it like very much not in Chicago so that nobody could think that I was writing about the school that I actually live at. So I made it a ski school, and we don't have those in Chicago. All that stuff. But there's also the other thing specific about New Hampshire. A couple things. One is that they don't require recordings of they don't require recordings of custodial interrogations, which is incredibly alarming. And there are a lot of states that don't, and that seems ridiculous. Another is that, as I read up on actual, things that have gone on with various schools, New Hampshire is really interesting because they've got a lot of very wealthy boarding schools in a not very wealthy state. So it would be quite different in, say, Massachusetts. But in New Hampshire, you have a school whose endowment is probably equal to the GDP of the state. and what does that mean in terms of their pressures on local and state police? So there was that. And then also, you have that choice of like, to what extent do you put it in the woods? Well, like, yeah, I'm going to put it way the hell in the woods. Why not? Like, that sounds better. And I had fun, I completely made up this campus. I had maps. And if anyone wants to see the marketing department actually they asked me for a hand-drawn map. And
I love that.
Mine was like really crappy, but they had an artist like actually do it. So you can find it on my website, like this actual campus map.
Oh, I love
but,
that.
Yeah, but I had a lot of fun just inventing it. People people who know East Coast boarding schools are like, is it actually this school? And I'm like, no, why would I do that when I could invent a boarding school? That's so fun.
Right.
So I loved inventing the campus and all of that stuff. But, just the idea of like I said, I don't want the kind of mystical Harry Potter, dark academia kind of version of this. I want a realist thing. But at the same time, what's evocative, like the idea of older buildings, the idea of bridges over this ravine, like there were things that I could really use that felt juicy. So
Thank you.
thank you. Hi, Jeffrey.
Hello. This is the opposite of a specific question. What inspires you, both as a writer and as a person?
Ooh, yeah, thank you. I like that. As a writer, I always am starting with plot, honestly. I know that so many writers start with character. I'm really always starting with scenario. Like, what if this happened? What if this happened? My brain just generates those all day. And then setting is very, very inspiring to me. I dream in settings in a really weird way. Like I've found very few other people who even understand what I'm saying with this, but if you are one of them, please tell me later. I have settings that I return to again and again.
This happens to me all the time.
Oh my God.
All
Okay.
the time.
Do you change them and then the changes are still there? Or
No, I don't really change them. They just recur.
Yeah.
And so sometimes I wake up and I sometimes think maybe that's the real world and this
Oh my
is
God.
this is
Whoa.
my dream world.
Yeah.
Because
they're
I
so
mean,
real.
as long as they're recurring about the
Yeah.
same amount of time,
Oh my God.
maybe
Yeah.
this is the dream world. I don't know. I mean, I'm coming to Politics and Prose a lot. So.
Oh my God. Well, for me, it's that, but it's also, and, a lot of, they're made up, but then I'll like add on to them, but it can also be a real place. Like I'll dream about my college campus, but then in a certain dream, I'll add something. And then for years, as I dream about my college campus, that thing is there. So like in my mind, there is a cruise ship in the middle of my college campus because I put it there in one dream and now it's still there. But setting, just like when I am in, like old spaces are very, very evocative for me. And I think that taps into just a broader sense of, I think the passage of time, history is deeply inspiring to me. Like just layers of time, largely as a writer, right? Like that's what gets me going. I sometimes will do writing residencies and I've realized that when I went to this one in Wyoming and it was the most beautiful place. It was incredible. And there were like bald eagles everywhere. And I was not inspired in the slightest to write. It was such a I did good work, but I just had no inspiration because it wasn't that history versus residencies that I'll go to, right? Like artist residencies where it's been going since the 1920s and everything is super creepy and haunted and really, really old. And like this is I wrote a lot of The Great Believers at the same desk where Sylvia Plath wrote her first collection. It's still there. And it's like that, those layers of history are like, that's when I start to actually generate. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
sure.
you. I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions. Maybe. Yeah.
We'll see. Okay.
So I follow you on Twitter, and I really enjoy your tweets. And then it was so interesting to see the kind of the character of Twitter in the book itself.
Yeah.
And I was just curious, kind of how that came to be, and your reflections on using that as a setting in some ways of something.
Yeah. It's right. I do spend too much time on Twitter, and I also finished editing this long before Twitter started to do whatever it's doing now. It's been really interesting to me the way that it's been kind of the public square, especially in terms of certain scandals in the past few years. And there is this question, so this, I'm not giving away too much here, but while Bodie is back at this school, her ex-husband is kind of Me Too'd online. And Bodie then like defends him and steps in it, just, like things spiral. But that is the place where that would happen. It really is. And I, you know, it's been interesting for me seeing things like that go down in the writing world, in the arts worlds, various arts worlds, where it's where it happens, but it's also the worst possible forum for it, because all you can do is come down like black and white, this is good, this is bad, when in certain cases there needs to be a much more nuanced discussion. And so it felt like the place, you know, as we're talking, I'm thinking about accountability. I'm thinking about people looking back and holding people accountable for their past actions. And are you the same person? And what if times have changed, and just that whole mess? Twitter needed to be part of that, I think. And if that mean, you know, in 20 years, if someone picks up this book and they'd be like, what? It'd be like reading a book about MySpace or something. Like, I don't know. But
I mean, what can you do? It is, yeah.
It's of the moment.
Yeah,
Right,
absolutely.
right.
Yeah.
yeah, so we should write MySpace novels, both of us. We should,
I know, that would be really fun. We would love,
I
yeah.
just wanted to say also, I really got a kick out of the podcast name. So you had like tweeted about like trying to find the name.
Yes.
And it was like in the book, and so that was
Oh,
really
thank
so fun,
you.
so fun.
Yeah, I'll say like, what happened, I'll just say really quickly, I had this name for Bodie has a podcast about women in Hollywood, and it was originally called Hollywoodland, which was the original name of Hollywood, and I checked that there were no podcasts with that name, because there weren't. And then 3 years later, I'm in copy edits, and there are 2 podcasts named. I was like, crap. So I was on Twitter, I was like, help me think of a name for this podcast, and someone comes in with Starlet Fever, and I was like, yes.
Oh,
So she's credited in my acknowledgements.
So cool.
Thank
Okay,
you.
so let's do one final. Oh, I think
We're going to do one more question.
One more.
Okay,
Okay.
yeah.
All right. Yay. And if you didn't get a chance to ask me, just ask me in the signing line for everybody else, please.
High pressure. Okay, this is kind of a specific plot question, and without spoiling anything, also trying to speak cryptically.
Yeah.
In terms of the person to whom is the you for Bodie throughout the book, did you ever, when writing it or when kind of coming up with the structure, have any configuration which they were meeting in the future? It was a face-to-face,
okay.
or
I get what
was it always something that was a more abstract you?
Yeah.
And if so, why? I mean,
Yeah.
there are some obvious reasons why this person, but that kind of stuck that this was the person who you chose, that was this you.
Yeah, no, I can definitely answer that cryptically as well. I'll say, you know, basically the you of the book is someone that Bodie is really looking back on with different eyes than she had at the time, right? And is sort of, you know, like upset with, holding accountable for things in the past. Someone who really did do damage to people. And I was never interested in that person reappearing in the present. I think for one thing, it's a little bit of sort of, let's say, an inversion of certain stories where that's the person who gets to speak, right? Like Lolita, kind of. I just said that quietly in case, but like, right? Where like that's the person who gets to speak. And I did not want that. You know, if you think about who gets to speak in the book, it's basically. There are really 3 people who get to speak in the book. It is Bodhi's story. Late in the book, we hear pretty long monologues from 2 other people, one classmate of hers and one other key person. And those are all people who they were the people I needed to let have a voice. And then I think I was more interested in that person as an absence than as a presence. I was more interested in the sort of empty space of not being able to confront somebody, not knowing, not being able to ask them these questions, which is so often the case with someone who harmed you or wronged you. Either you don't want to meet them again, or you can't, but you still have all of this anger directed at that person, and you cannot confront them about it for whatever reason. And so that was part of it too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Folks, thank you so much for being here. Just a quick reminder, I'm going to say thank you to these 2 in a moment. Don't forget about your chairs, and also there are books behind the register. Buy so many. And thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you.
Thank you, Angie.
Thank you.
It's a phenomenal
Thank
book.
you so